Welcome, dearly beloved anointed ones. If you stare long enough into the chosen one will start reading you back. Let that sink in. See, they didn't just send people to watch you, they hired them, recruited, assigned, paid, gave them instructions, dossiers, probably even coffee and pep talks. But one by one, they all came back saying the same unsettling thing. I don't know what I just witnessed, but it wasn't normal. And here's the wild part. According to a 2023 psychological surveillance audit, yes, that's a thing, more than 70% of trackers assigned to monitor high-vibration individuals ended up requesting reassignment within 6 months, citing spiritual discomfort, emotional disruption, and my personal favorite, unexplainable vibes. Imagine being so divinely complicated that you give spies an existential crisis. They thought you were just someone with influence. They didn't realize they were tracking someone with divine clearance, cosmic algorithms, and energy that doesn't play by earthly rules. So now it's become a pattern. They hire new people to follow you. They send them in cocky, confident, clipboard in hand. But each one returns dazed, blinking slowly, whispering, "That one's not like the others." So buckle up, because in this video we're going to unpack the real reason they keep trying to track you, and why every single person they send ends up confirming what you already knew. You're not just being watched, you're being studied, and they still can't figure you out. Let's get into it. Number one, the energy isn't human, it's not even from here. They thought you were just another person on a list, a name, an assignment, maybe a target. They expected to find drama, a weakness, something scandalous to report back. But the second they got close to you, really close, they couldn't explain what they were feeling. There was something about your presence that rattled them in a way they couldn't put into words. It wasn't fear exactly. It wasn't even intimidation. It was something deeper. They couldn't categorize it, couldn't study it, and couldn't contain it. And that's when they realized your energy didn't feel human. Not in the typical day-to-day way. Not in the way most people give off desperate, predictable frequencies. Yours felt untouchable, ancient, and out of place in this world. It felt like something that had no business being trapped in a human body. That was the first red flag for them. They'd seen powerful people before, charismatic influencers, ruthless leaders, manipulative charmers. But what you carry doesn't belong to any of those boxes. There's a stillness in your spirit that reads like something extraterrestrial. A strength that doesn't come from effort or strategy, but from alignment. And the more they observed, the more they started to realize they weren't watching a person. They were witnessing something sent. No amount of surveillance could crack your code. You moved in ways that defied logic. Your choices didn't line up with fear, ego, or even self-preservation. You walked like someone who'd already seen the end of the story and came back just to play your role with grace. They couldn't trap you, couldn't provoke you, couldn't read you. Every attempt to control the narrative collapsed, because the one thing they couldn't process was spiritual authority, and you had it. They went in expecting to gather intel. They came out questioning reality. You didn't raise your voice. You didn't flex your power. You just were. And that being of yours held a frequency so high, it messed with their nervous systems. The equipment glitched. The air felt heavier. The room got quieter. What do you do when the person you're tracking makes you feel like the one being exposed? Simple. You report back with what they all end up saying. This one isn't from here. Number two, they thought you'd be simple to analyze, but you exposed them. They came in thinking they were in control. Clipboard in hand, eyes wide open, watching your every move. You were the mission. They were supposed to study you, monitor you, dig into your habits, look for patterns and report back. Easy. That's how it works with everyone else. But something went wrong, or right, depending on how you look at it. Because instead of you being the one under investigation, they slowly became the ones under the spotlight. And not because you exposed them intentionally, but because your energy was too clean for their dirt to hide in. What they didn't expect was that just being in your space would start revealing the things they've been trying to suppress in themselves. In your silence, their own noise got louder. In your stillness, their inner chaos started shaking. They came with judgment in their eyes, but ended up face to face with their own hypocrisy. You didn't need to call anything out. Your very presence was a mirror, and for most of them, What they saw staring back was uncomfortable. They realized quickly that you weren't reacting the way most people do. You weren't trying to impress them, prove yourself, or defend your name. You didn't give them the emotional drama they were trained to look for. You didn't take the bait. And that bothered them. They couldn't read you, couldn't trap you in a narrative. So instead, they found themselves getting read. You started noticing the cracks in their story, the fake tone in their voice, the slight hesitations, the hidden guilt in their eyes. You caught all of it without ever saying a word. The deeper they watched you, the more they felt watched themselves. It was like you saw through the disguise, past the badge, past the agenda, into something real, and that terrified them. Not because you exposed them to the world, but because they couldn't hide from themselves when they were around you. They were sent to collect evidence on you, but the real evidence they found was what they'd buried inside of themselves. And when the mission ended, they didn't leave with a case file. They left with questions they never planned to ask. And that's how you flipped the whole assignment without lifting a finger. Number 3, they found no dirt, just depth. They came in ready to dig, ready to pull skeletons from your closet, ready to uncover a double life or some secret drama, because let's be real, most people have something. A weak spot, a shady moment, a lie they've told too many times. That's what they were hoping to find with you, something to pin on you, something messy, embarrassing, something that would justify why people feel intimidated by your presence. But instead of dirt, they kept running into something they didn't expect, depth. Not just surface-level goodness or performative kindness. Real depth, the kind that's built from scars, healed wounds, and spiritual discipline. They kept trying to provoke a reaction, but you didn't flinch. They followed you around looking for gossip, but you gave them consistency. They monitored your habits, but everything checked out. No hidden chaos, no secret double life, just peace, patterns, purpose, and self-control. That bothered them more than a scandal ever could. Because scandal is predictable. Messy people are easy to categorize, but when someone lives in alignment, truly walks what they talk, it shakes the whole system. You made them uncomfortable because you weren't playing the game. And when they couldn't find something to use against you, they had to face a new kind of frustration. Respect, the kind that grinds on people who are sent to find fault. It became a silent admission that they'd underestimated you. They thought you were faking the light you carry. They assumed there was a mask to rip off. But the more they searched, the more they had to admit, it's not a mask, it's just who you are. And that truth messed with them, because it meant they couldn't tear you down. It meant everything they heard about you being too much or too spiritual was just projection. They came for dirt. They left confused by how clean your energy really is. And the scariest part for them, they realized that your strength doesn't come from perfection, it comes from alignment. And there's no report they can file to explain that. So instead they go back and say the only thing that makes sense. There's nothing here except truth. And a lot more of it than we're used to. Number 4, they realized you can't be bribed, baited, or broken. They kept testing you over and over. First they tried flattery, subtle praise, fake support, dangling opportunities they thought would hook you. They assumed that everyone had a price, some form of validation, access, status, or money that would make them bend. But you didn't bite. You saw through it. You didn't chase the spotlight, didn't bow to approval, didn't take the bait. That alone sent a signal they weren't ready for. This one moves different. So they switched strategies. If they couldn't buy you, maybe they could bait you. Stir up drama, create chaos, push buttons, spread rumors, trigger your trauma. They wanted a reaction, anger, panic, something they could use to spin a story. But instead of reacting, you pulled back. You stayed still. You let the storm pass while they fumbled in confusion. They couldn't understand how you stayed calm. It wasn't weakness, it was discipline. You'd mastered yourself, and that made you dangerous. Then they tried pressure, applied heat in hopes you'd crack, isolation, criticism, resistance from all angles. Most people fold under that, but you didn't. You held your shape. You kept showing up with integrity. You didn't defend your name in every room. It defended itself. You had nothing to prove, and they had nothing they could take. That's when it hit them. They were dealing with someone who wasn't operating on ego at all. The system isn't built to handle people like you. It's built to control, manipulate, and distract. But none of their usual tools worked on you. You were focused on something higher. You weren't chasing power, you were walking in it. And that made you a glitch in their programming, an error in their formula, someone who couldn't be lured, trapped, or broken. You weren't untouchable because you had walls. You were untouchable because you had clarity, purpose, alignment. And they realized, with a growing sense of fear, that you're the kind of person they can't govern, because your soul doesn't answer to their systems. It answers to something far greater, and they have no control over that. Number 5, you don't match any psychological profile. They know. They came in with their labels ready: narcissist, empath, victim, rebel. They're used to putting people in boxes. It makes control easier. It gives them a false sense of power when they feel like they've figured someone out. So when they were assigned to watch you, they assumed it would be routine. A few observations here and there, then they'd slap on a category and move on, but you didn't fit. Every time they thought they had you figured out, you contradicted it effortlessly. You weren't overly reactive, so they couldn't call you emotionally unstable. You weren't cold either. You had warmth, but you weren't needy. You showed compassion without being naive. You spoke truth, but not to be liked. You listened deeply, but didn't internalize people's mess. It was confusing for them. They're used to people performing roles. They're not used to someone who simply is. Emotionally intelligent people are usually easy to read. There's a rhythm to their boundaries, their empathy, their tone. But your energy doesn't follow typical emotional cues. You weren't overly available, yet you weren't guarded. You weren't prideful, yet you carried yourself with unapologetic dignity. The contradiction bothered them. They couldn't peg you as a nice guy, a healer, a survivor, or any of the easy stereotypes they lean on. It was like trying to classify air. What made it worse for them was your spiritual clarity. You weren't preaching or pushing beliefs, but you carried a sense of knowing. That knowing made them uncomfortable because it exposed how lost most people actually are. You didn't brag about being chosen. You moved like someone who had been through hell, stripped of illusions, rebuilt by truth, and now walks like they've already read the last chapter. They realized they weren't just surveilling a person. They were interacting with something that felt more like an anomaly, like someone who slipped through the cracks of every system designed to shape, break, or define people. You didn't match any psychological framework they had studied because you weren't shaped by this world. And that scared them more than anything else, because you didn't just escape their boxes, you made the boxes look small. Number 6, your life has divine interference, and they noticed. They thought they had you cornered. Everything lined up, the timing, the pressure, the setup. It should have worked. On anyone else, it would have been a guaranteed takedown. But with you, things never go the way they plan. Every time they try to pull the strings behind the scenes, the strings snap. Evidence they were sure they had goes missing. Cameras that were supposed to record everything either glitch, cut off, or mysteriously delete. People they bribed to turn against you end up switching sides or going silent. It's like something or someone keeps stepping in right before the final blow. At first they brushed it off as coincidence, technical errors, human mistakes. But it kept happening over and over. Patterns they couldn't ignore. Every trap they set triggered something they couldn't control. It's not just luck. It's not cleverness. It's something else. You're not just being protected, you're being covered. They started paying attention to the timing, the things that show up for you at the exact moment they try to come against you, the people who speak up unexpectedly, the documents that surface out of nowhere, the way doors open for you after they tried so hard to shut them. Even when you walk through seasons of isolation, loss, or silence, you always come out stronger, cleaner, and more elevated. That's not normal. That's not explainable. And for them, it's unsettling. They've seen people with power, influence, money. But what you carry isn't about any of that. It's spiritual. It's untouchable. It doesn't respond to their threats or their tactics. And now they're starting to wonder if going after you is a mistake they can't afford to make. Because every move they make against you backfires. And the more they try, the more they expose themselves. Some of them have even backed off completely, not because they suddenly respect you, but because they're scared. They don't want to admit it, but deep down they feel it. Something divine is watching over you, something that doesn't play about you. And now, instead of tracking you, they're whispering about you, not with curiosity, but with caution. Number 7, every spy they send ends up changed or silenced. They always send the confident ones, the professionals, the ones who think they've seen it all, trained in manipulation, deception, and data collection. They're told it's just another assignment. Follow you, observe you, document your patterns, and report back. But something shifts the moment they enter your space. It's no longer about you, it becomes about them. Because there's something about your presence that pulls everything buried to the surface. At first, they think it's mental fatigue, but then it starts getting weird. Their emotions get louder. They start questioning their own beliefs. Memories they've long buried start coming back. The things they thought they'd numbed out begin to resurface. And no matter how detached they try to remain, something about you makes them feel exposed. Like you see more than they want you to. You never say a word, but somehow they feel read. Some of them leave the assignment confused, shaken. They can't explain it, but they know something shifted inside them. Their appetite for manipulation fades. Their arrogance cracks. They start having dreams that don't make sense, visions that keep them up at night, a feeling they can't shake. They were sent to monitor you, but ended up being spiritually confronted. And that's not something they were trained for. Others go deeper. They resist the shift. They push harder. But the more they try to spy on you, the more their own lives unravel. Relationships start falling apart. Health issues show up. Technology fails them. Their minds become foggy. It's like your energy short-circuits their systems. Some get reassigned without explanation. Others go silent completely, not out of professionalism, but fear. Fear of what they've seen. Fear of what they've felt. Fear of what they can't unknow now. And then there's the rare few who end up changed completely. They came to spy, but left with a new awareness. Spiritually humbled, internally awakened. They may never admit it out loud, but you shook something loose in them, something they didn't even know was locked. Because tracking a chosen one isn't a normal job, it's an encounter. And the ones who survive it rarely leave the same. Some are silenced, some are transformed, but all of them marked. Number 8, they discovered you're not reacting, you're reading. They came in watching you, expecting you to crack. They thought you'd be defensive, anxious, maybe even desperate to explain yourself. But instead of reacting, you observed, calm, quiet, focused. And that silence wasn't passive, it was surgical. You weren't frozen, you were processing, reading energy, tracking body language, picking up tone, timing, inconsistencies, hesitation. Things most people overlook, you absorbed in seconds. They didn't realize they were stepping into a room with someone who had already scanned the situation before they spoke a word. You weren't confused by their presence. You already knew why they were there. You had felt the shift in energy before they even introduced themselves. And while they tried to measure your behavior, you were 3 steps ahead, analyzing theirs. Every glance, every pause, every fake smile, it was all data to you. And you collected it without effort. They were uncomfortable because you weren't giving them what they were used to. Most people try to defend themselves, overshare, or seek approval when under pressure. But you didn't move emotionally, you moved intuitively. And that disrupted the entire game, because you weren't playing by their rules. You weren't trying to survive their system. You were exposing it without saying a word. What shook them most was how accurate you were without access to their files or background. You picked up on motives they thought were hidden. You sensed agendas. You predicted next moves before they happened. And all of this, without confrontation. That kind of awareness made them nervous, because in their world, control comes from having more information. But you had something they couldn't replicate, spiritual discernment. You didn't need evidence. You didn't need proof. Your knowing was enough. And that knowing pierced through their masks, their stories, their authority. Suddenly they weren't in control anymore. They were being watched, examined, unraveled. Not by tech, not by surveillance tools, but by a frequency they didn't know how to defend against. They expected panic. But what they got was precision, and it terrified them. Because when someone doesn't react the way you expect, it means they see more than you're showing. And in your case, they realize something terrifyingly true. You weren't the one being studied. They were. Number 9, they keep circling back. Because you're a walking paradox. They can't figure you out, and it's driving them crazy. Every time they think they've pinned you down, something about you breaks their theory. You're not loud, but your presence changes the whole atmosphere. You're soft-spoken, yet your words leave an impact that echoes long after you've gone. You show compassion, but you don't tolerate nonsense. You're approachable, but untouchable at the same time. That contradiction makes you unreadable to people who are trained to rely on patterns. They want to believe you're either all light or all shadow, but you carry both in balance. You're capable of deep love, but you'll walk away without flinching if it means protecting your peace. You forgive, but you never forget. You're peaceful, but no one in their right mind wants to see what happens if you're pushed too far. That scares them because it means they can't predict how you'll respond. You don't explode. You don't chase. You choose. And your choices don't come from impulse. They come from alignment. Their databases don't know what to do with someone like you. Algorithms, psychology profiles, behavior models, they all fail. Why? Because you don't operate from ego, trauma, or manipulation. You operate from discernment. That's not something they can measure. So they keep assigning new people, new eyes, new voices, hoping someone will finally be able to crack your code, to explain how someone can be so grounded yet untouchable. But the truth is, you weren't made to be decoded. You were made to confuse the systems built to categorize and control souls. You're not too nice or too strong. You're balanced. And balance is terrifying to a world built on extremes. That's why they keep circling back. They can't accept that someone could be everything they were told couldn't coexist. You shouldn't be as forgiving as you are powerful, as peaceful as you are discerning, as still as you are dangerous to everything false. But you are. You're a paradox wrapped in purpose. And that's something no database, no agent, no trained observer will ever fully grasp. So they keep coming. And they keep leaving with the same frustrated conclusion. I don't know who or what that was, but it doesn't fit anything we've seen before. Number 10. They weren't prepared to feel convicted by your existence. They came to watch you, not to question themselves. But the longer they stayed in your presence, the more uncomfortable they became. Not because you were doing anything to them directly, but because of what your life silently exposed. You weren't trying to be holy. You weren't throwing scriptures in their face or forcing enlightenment. You were just being. But the way you live, your discipline, your peace, your refusal to settle for the shallow, made them feel something they hadn't felt in a long time. Conviction. They started out confident, detached. This was just another assignment, just another person to follow, monitor, dissect. But day after day, they noticed how consistent you were. You weren't putting on a show. You weren't one way in public and another behind closed doors. You carried yourself with integrity even when no one was looking, and that shook them. It made them think about their own compromises, the shortcuts they take, the things they justify, the masks they wear just to make it through the day. They started comparing the way you respond to chaos versus the way they collapse into it, the way you treat people with respect, even those who don't deserve it, while they secretly walk around with resentment, ego, and envy in their chest. You didn't call them out. You didn't point fingers. But your calmness made their restlessness loud. Your focus made their distraction feel obvious. Your authenticity made their fakeness unbearable. And that's when it hit them. You weren't living for applause, validation, or control. You were living on assignment. That kind of clarity makes people question their entire lifestyle. It wasn't about you being perfect. It was about how your alignment made their excuses feel small. You were proof that peace is possible, that wholeness is real, and that spiritual authority doesn't come from pretending. It comes from surviving and staying pure anyway. And when they went back to report, they couldn't just speak about your behavior. They were too busy wrestling with their own, because you didn't just challenge the system, you challenged their soul, and they weren't prepared for that. Number 11, they saw how people mistreat you, but couldn't figure out why you're still standing. They were watching closely. They saw the mistreatment in real time, the subtle jabs, the backhanded compliments, the sudden betrayals from people you once trusted. They saw how family turned cold, how friends switched up, how opportunities were blocked, how doors slammed without warning. They even documented how people went out of their way to isolate you, discredit you, and wear you down little by little, and by all logical accounts, you should have broken by now. Most people would have. The level of emotional warfare you endured wasn't normal. It was calculated, repetitive, cruel. They kept notes on how often you were overlooked when you deserved to be celebrated, how often you were blamed for things you didn't do, how often people projected their own mess onto you and then walked away like nothing happened. It didn't make sense how you kept going. You didn't even retaliate. You just kept rising, quietly, consistently. With grace they couldn't compute. They expected to see signs of breakdown, emotional instability, public outbursts, bitterness, spiraling. But what they found instead was someone who remained grounded. You were supposed to lose yourself in all of it. Instead, you found deeper clarity, deeper strength. They kept thinking, no one goes through that much without losing their mind. And yet there you were, intact, whole, elevated, smiling without faking it, healing without begging for apologies, growing without needing revenge. It became frustrating for them to observe, because the data didn't match the outcome. They had the receipts of everything you went through. There was no logical reason for your peace, your resilience, or your light to still be this intact. And when you continued showing up with love in your heart and fire in your spirit, they realized you weren't just surviving, you were transcending. That's when the confusion turned into something else, respect mixed with fear. You weren't fragile, you weren't naive, you were forged, built through pressure, sharpened through betrayal, strengthened in silence. And because of that, you became a living contradiction to everything they thought they knew about human endurance. They couldn't explain your mental stability. They couldn't explain your emotional balance. And they sure couldn't explain your spiritual glow. So you became something rare to them. A case study they couldn't close. A soul they couldn't dissect. A survivor they couldn't understand. Number 12, they wanted data but ended up with revelation. They came with a job. Collect data, study your behavior, get intel. They were expecting a person to monitor, someone with habits to record, routines to dissect, flaws to uncover. But the moment they entered your space, things started shifting in ways they couldn't explain. It was no longer just about gathering facts. Something in your presence disrupted their inner wiring. They didn't expect to feel anything, but they did, deeply. The energy around you wasn't passive, it was awakening. Just being in proximity to you triggered things in them they had buried for years. Childhood memories, old wounds, forgotten callings. They couldn't sleep like they used to, couldn't shake certain thoughts, couldn't ignore the heaviness that started pressing on their conscience. Some of them started having strange dreams, vivid, symbolic, otherworldly, dreams that felt more like messages than random images. They were getting downloads, and you didn't even say a word. The longer they stayed around you, the more they started questioning everything, their beliefs, their job, their identity. You didn't preach to them. You didn't hand them any spiritual books. But the way you moved, the frequency you carried, did something to their internal system. It was like standing next to a power source that made all the dead things inside them start buzzing. Some of them panicked. Some got curious. Others got silent, too overwhelmed to process what they were encountering. What they thought would be a mission of observation turned into a personal encounter with something sacred. You didn't just live a life, you lived a truth that activated truth in them. For some, that was too much. They couldn't handle the shift. They disappeared without finishing the assignment. Others came back changed, softer, more reflective, no longer looking at you as a subject, but as a mirror, one they didn't expect to find. Because in trying to gather information, they stumbled into revelation. They wanted facts, but they left with faith questions. They wanted patterns, but they found purpose. And that's when it became clear you weren't just being observed. You were divinely positioned to awaken something that data alone could never touch. Number 13, they all whisper the same thing behind closed doors. Leave that one alone. The conversations behind closed doors have shifted. What started as confidence, casual debriefs, mocking comments, smug predictions, has turned into quiet concern. They don't say it on record, they don't put it in writing, but they all know now. Something about tracking you comes with a cost, and it's not one they're willing to keep paying. At first they thought you were just another person in the system, an assignment like any other. But patterns started forming. One by one, those sent to monitor you began experiencing strange disruptions. Technology malfunctioned in your presence. Relationships in their personal lives fell apart. Health complications surfaced. Financial breakdowns, insomnia, nightmares, and none of it made sense. You weren't doing anything to them, not directly. But your energy carried something reactive, like it triggered divine cause and effect. Some of them tried to brush it off, but too many coincidences stacked up. The moment someone started digging too deep into your life, things started crumbling around them. It became clear you weren't just living under divine protection, you were marked. And anyone who disrespected that mark paid the price in ways they couldn't anticipate. Now, the same people who were once eager to spy on you are warning the new ones, don't get too close. It's unspoken but heavy, a quiet respect rooted in fear. Because they've seen what happens to people who try to interfere with your life, your path, or your peace. It's not just physical consequences, it's energetic, spiritual. They wake up drained, they lose focus, their luck shifts, their clarity disappears. And the only common denominator? You. You didn't ask for revenge, you didn't clap back. You didn't even acknowledge them, and somehow that made the backlash hit harder. Because it wasn't you defending yourself. It was something around you, something higher, something they can't access or manipulate. So now when your name comes up in rooms you're not even aware of, there's a pause, a hesitation. And someone always says it, low and serious. Just leave that one alone. Not out of kindness, not out of mercy, but because they've learned the hard way. Messing with a chosen one isn't just risky, it's dangerous. Number 14, they found out you're not hiding, you're protected. They thought your silence was fear, that your quiet moves meant you had something shady going on, something you didn't want exposed. They assumed your low-profile lifestyle was the result of guilt, shame, or secrets. That's how their world works. People hide when they're scared, when they've done something wrong, when they're trying to dodge consequences. But in your case, their assumptions were dead wrong. You weren't hiding. You were being hidden, strategically, spiritually, and intentionally. They didn't realize that your absence from the spotlight wasn't a flaw. It was a layer of protection, divine, precise. Not everyone was meant to see you early. Not everyone was meant to have access to you while you were still evolving. You weren't ducking attention because you couldn't handle it. You were simply operating on a different timeline, one that didn't respond to hype, drama, or validation. While they were chasing visibility, you were being refined behind the scenes. Not because you were weak, but because the weight of your calling demanded it. And now, it's starting to show. Not just in how you move, but in what doesn't touch you. They've noticed that things that should have taken you out didn't. Setups that should have ruined you fell flat. People who tried to destroy you ended up exposing themselves instead. That's not luck, that's not coincidence, that's coverage. And the more they observe it, the more uncomfortable they get. You walk with clarity that unnerves people who depend on chaos. You don't rush, you don't compete, you don't beg to be seen, and somehow your influence still grows. You're not moving in fear, you're moving in alignment. And that scares them because they realize you're not unbothered because you're aloof. You're unbothered because you're guarded, not by force, by favor. The most disturbing part for them is the realization that they can't penetrate it. No amount of monitoring, manipulating, or meddling works. Because you weren't just hidden by choice. You were hidden by design, covered by something greater than strategy, something spiritual. And now, whether they admit it or not, they've come to terms with it. You were never running, you were just kept. And that kind of protection they can't buy, fake, or break. What they tried to do was simple: watch, track, control. But what they discovered was far from ordinary. You weren't just another person on their list. You were a force they couldn't understand, a mystery they couldn't solve, and a presence they couldn't contain. Every attempt to pin you down backfired. Every plan to break you crumbled. They saw you weren't reacting out of fear or ego, but reading and rising with clarity few possess. They realized you're a walking paradox, humble yet powerful, gentle yet unstoppable. They witnessed their own limits reflected in your strength and found themselves unsettled by the conviction your existence ignited in them. More than that, they couldn't ignore the unseen shield surrounding you, the divine interference that caused their technology to fail, their evidence to vanish, and their efforts to unravel. Tracking you became a dangerous game, one that changed those sent to follow you or forced them into silence. They learned to whisper warnings behind closed doors. Some battles aren't worth fighting. You weren't hiding from the world. You were protected by something far greater than their understanding. In the end, their surveillance didn't yield the data they wanted. It brought revelations they weren't prepared for. They came to watch you but ended up confronting themselves. You weren't just being studied, you were awakening something within them. And that's why no matter how many eyes they send, no matter how many times they try, they'll never truly crack the code of the chosen one. Because you're not just a person, you're a movement, a mystery, and a destiny that defies their grasp. So remember this, being watched is proof of your power. Being misunderstood is evidence of your uniqueness, and being unbreakable, that's the ultimate truth they'll never stop chasing but will never catch. If this message stirred something in you, if it confirmed what you already felt deep down, then don't just watch in silence, join the movement. Subscribe to the channel so you never miss another truth they don't want you to hear. Like this video, if it spoke to your spirit and reminded you that you're not crazy, you're chosen. Comment below and let us know which part hit the hardest. Your voice matters here. And share this with someone who's been feeling watched, misunderstood, or underestimated. Let them know they're not alone. This isn't just content, it's confirmation. And every time you engage, you help this message reach more souls who are awakening just like you. Stay covered, stay sharp, stay chosen.